Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed working with anonymous closures, and now we're on to section 3, discussing global imports. So our current module seems to only need local variables, right? But if we look a little closer in one of these methods, we might find that a global variable is involved in one of them. Let's say that there was some global variable called wartime, and it currently is set to true, which means the kingdom is at war. Turns out, inside of our makeWeaponRequest function, if it's wartime, we want to let civilians have weaponry to protect themselves. So our makeWeaponRequest function checks to see if war exists, and if so, we'll let both knights and civilians have weaponry. First thing that happens is that the local scope of the namespace would be checked to see if wartime existed anywhere inside of that namespace. And then if that namespace happened to be nested, we would go into that scope and check that scope to see if it's there, all the way up to the global scope. Now, standard global use in a module pattern can cause two problems. The first is that when non-local variables are referenced inside of a module, the entire length of the scope chain is checked for that variable. First, in this case, for wartime, the local scope of the namespace would be checked. So they'd look around the armory, see if wartime is there. It's not. And then if that namespace happened to be nested, then the outer namespace would be checked too. And so on, and so on, and so on, until we've reached the global scope. Now that search is going to happen every time wartime is encountered throughout the entire module. That's a very expensive process if there is any sort of namespace depth or multiple references across the module. Problem number 2 is that lengthy namespaces mean that global variables can possibly have unclear scope, leading to code that is really tough to manage. Developer gets into your file here to maintain your armory module, sees wartime, this file is very long by the way, so is the global file, doesn't know where wartime is coming from or what changes he can make to this particular file. It's really important for developers who are maintaining your code to be able to place the source of your variable's data. You don't want them to have to look through tons of code just to figure out where the data came from, or what's worse, they may actually make terrible changes to data they think is local. So for clearer, faster globals in your modules, we want you to use global imports. Now, while devs may still need to review code, and who doesn't, we all need to review code constantly, importing globals, though, creates much faster local variables that are also more clear in source. The first way we want to incorporate a global import is to add a parameter to the wrapper immediately invoked function. Here you can see we're passing in the war parameter. Now we've got one parameter here, but you can create just as many parameters as globals there are that you're importing. So since we're importing this parameter war, we're going to need every place that we make reference to that global to change its name to the parameter. Here you can see in our if statement we've replaced wartime with war. And here's where the magic happens for global imports. We're going to use our calling parentheses on our immediately invoked function expression to actually pass in the global that we want to become war. And which one is that? Of course it is wartime. So now we have passed wartime in to our immediately invoked function expression. Wartime becomes war as a parameter, and war gets used throughout the entire scope. Yeah, imports. As a result of importing 2, the variable that you need from the external scope gets closed up as a local value. It's just another piece of data boxed up in the closure. Cool little bonus about that is that the function's parameter creates this modifiable value inside the local scope of your namespace. That's pretty cool. And the global value that you passed in stays protected if it needs to be. Great, so now you've got anonymous closures for module patterns as well as how to get your globals in there through using global imports. We're going to give you some challenges on that topic, and we'll see you back for the very last section. See you soon.